Welcome to The Friend I Wish I Had, the show that was made for listeners everywhere, looking for some company in the uncertainty of this thing called life. You will hear stories of personal events, lived experiences, and resilience. Stories that remind you that you are not alone. When you feel there is no one to talk to, you will find a story to hold on to, like the friend you wish you had. I am your host, Sandy Falcon, and I am honored to be the friend I wish I had. Let's begin. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. I'd like to continue from the last episode, which was a bit of my history. I'm going to give you a little bit of a recap. I gave you a history of my life from childhood to my 17th year. Within months, my life completely changed from that point on. Before that, I had mentioned that I had moved a few times, actually a lot. And I had lived in Ecuador, lived in the US, back to Canada. And when I got to Canada, it was not by choice that I decided to stay. I had to stay because I was in the process of a green card and not supposed to travel to Canada, but we didn't know that when I did travel to Canada. And my green card application was then revoked. So I had to stay in Canada for a minimum of 1 year. When I was in Canada, I had to live with my mom, and I hadn't lived with her for 4 years up until this point. I hadn't really spent very much time with her besides on vacations in the summer. So my mom and I weren't very close at this point. We were very different. I mean, the last time she took care of me was when I was 13, and now I was 17 going on 18. So there was a bit of friction in that whole relationship. So within months of living with my mom, I started drinking. I stopped going to school. So up at this point, I was in my senior year, so my last year of high school. But when I moved back to Canada, I just basically, like I said before, I had lost my bearings. I didn't know what I was doing or where I belonged. So Um, I was very confused, and I started drinking. I stopped going to school, and I started using drugs. So I started using drugs when I was about 17, turning 18 years old. I had made friends, and my friends were wonderful. And I need to establish that I am not blaming anyone for the choices that I made in my life, not at all. The friends that I had were not influencing me in any way, shape, or form to use drugs. The first time I ever used drugs, actually, I wasn't with my friends. I ended up going out. We had gone to a party, and my friends were with me, and one of the people who was at that party, who I didn't know, had asked me if I wanted to go to the store with her. And I was very friendly and always trying to fit in. So I didn't want to be rude, and I wanted to go. So I said, of course, we could go out to the store. We were going to a convenience store. So we went to the convenience store, and she was older than me, probably 5 years older than me. And when we got back to the apartment to where the party was at, she offered me some drugs, and I didn't want to say no. I I genuinely said yes, one, because I didn't want to seem like I was being rude, as weird as that may sound. And two, I didn't want her to think that, I don't know, that I wasn't cool. So I accepted. I said yes. And that was the first time I ever did drugs. Well, the drugs that I became addicted to, which was cocaine. Before that, I had dabbled, and I mean very small bits, dabbled into weed. I had smoked weed before, and I didn't like it. But that was the first time I tried cocaine, and I was I was very interested in that drug. And I got back to the apartment, I remember, and within a couple of minutes, I started doing all of the dishes. And my two friends that I was with at that party came up to me and they were like, "What is wrong with you?" And I said, "Nothing. I just want to do the dishes. I want to wash all of these dishes." And um, they both looked at me and they were like, "You're high, aren't you? You did something, didn't you?" And I remember that I just kind of laughed it off, and they were like, "Oh my God, Sandy, what did you do?" So I need to establish that from the beginning. It was not the influence of my friends that made me do drugs or made me use drugs. Now, that's the beginning of my drug journey. And I was pretty much hooked after that um, for, like I said, about 16 to 17 years. But I did end up finishing high school a year later. And after that, I went to a small vocational college and I got a travel and tourism diploma. And pretty much right out of college, I got hired by an airline. And I started to become semi independent. And I bought a car and I was on a good track. I started to settle in to the idea that I was staying in Canada and that I was going to work at the airport and I was going to continue to take care of myself. And I still lived with my mom, but our relationship wasn't horrible. I mean, it was my mom worked, I worked, my stepdad worked. There wasn't very much there. I mean, we lived together and there was no disrespect in any sort of way. It was just, I was very, I guess, independent in some weird way, sort of independent, or I tried not to mingle too much in the house, and I was normally out a lot, like all the time. I was always out, and even worse when I got a car. So by the time I so just a small recap here, I finished high school a year later. So instead of finishing high school when I was 18, I finished high school when I was 19. And then by the time I finished the college travel and tourism diploma, I was 20. I got hired by the airline by the time I was 20 and turning 21. And the month of my 21st birthday, I went out with my some of my friends. So my birthday's in May. So in May of my 21st year, or turning 21, I went out with some friends and we went to a club and we were having a lot of fun. And the weirdest thing happened. And I don't understand how or why, or maybe I give this story a lot of importance, but it sticks out in my head because it's how I met my first husband. So I was on the dance floor and I was dancing with a couple of my girlfriends, and there was a gentleman on the dance floor, and he was very different. Like, he was an older gentleman. He was dancing by himself, but he was dancing in a manner that was very art like. It wasn't like club dancing. It was like he was dancing like contemporary art. It caused attention. So clearly I paid attention to him dancing on the floor there, and I was like, wow, this man is so interesting. And he walked up to me and he grabbed my hand. And when he grabbed my hand, I just started dancing. Now, we weren't dancing close. Like, he was just holding my hand kind of far away, and just we were just kind of moving. And he grabbed another person's hand, which would later be my husband. But he grabbed this other person's hand and he put our hands together and he made us hold hands. Like, I did not know who this guy was. I had never met him in my life. I remember he was wearing an orange sweater. And I remember that when we held hands, it was like there was chemistry. It was the most interesting thing I had ever experienced. It was so odd. And after he made us hold hands, we danced together the entire night, the rest of the night. Like, that was it. There was nobody else there in our minds. Like, we just danced and danced, and we ended up just hitting it off and exchanged numbers. And the next day we got together, we went out for coffee. Our friends met, like, my friends met his friends, and we were inseparable from that moment on. So that was probably at the end of May that I met him. And we continued to hang out and started dating, and it was very comfortable. We were very close. I was happy. And within months of that, I found out I was pregnant 3 months later. And that was my pregnancy with my first son. And I was 21 by this point, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what was going to happen. I remember that he was very excited, and he told me that he would stay with me. He would never leave me, and that he was happy that we were going to have a child. And I believed him, and I was happy as well. So I told my parents, I told my mom that I was pregnant, and my mom basically said, you need to get married. You can't have a baby and not be married. And I agreed. I didn't want to have a child out of wedlock, and I believed that, my son's father and I were actually going to stay together forever. So within months from the end of May to September, I got pregnant and got married by September. So that was fast. And I didn't know the man I was marrying. I had no idea who he was. I mean, I thought I knew who he was, but how much can you really know somebody in 3 months of meeting them and getting pregnant and getting married? I mean, there's not very much time to get to know somebody. So that was not a very good decision. I regretted that decision very quickly, but I also was scared not to be married or continue the relationship because I didn't want my son to grow up without his father. So there was a lot of turmoil in my head as to what I should do in regards to that relationship. And it did take me over a year to separate and eventually divorce him. There was a lot of things I didn't know about him, and I found out day by day by day. And those issues are his issues, they're not mine, which is why I won't divulge too much information regarding the type of human he was. But I can say that I wasn't happy, and what he emotionally caused me to believe about myself was very hard to unprogram from my mind. But I need you to understand that this isn't a pity party. I don't want my listeners to feel that this is a poor me situation. I don't regret any of the decisions that I made, and I don't blame anyone for the decisions that I made. I don't blame my mom for telling me that I should get married. I don't blame my ex-husband for teaching me to be strong and independent, although it was a bit of a hard way to learn, but I did nevertheless. Everything that I have lived has been an experience that has formed the individual I am today. So everything that has happened has allowed me to be a more compassionate human being. It's because of all of these things that I've gone through and because of all of this trauma that I have sustained that I don't look at people and think that I am better than anybody in no way, shape, or form. Everybody has issues and no one is perfect. And if we could just learn to accept people with compassion as opposed to treat everybody with judgment, it would be so much easier to talk and to tell people their your vulnerabilities and your shameful secrets, because carrying that burden alone is just, it's so hard and it's so painful and it's just lonely, which can lead to so many other places in our lives that we really don't need to go to. I mean, if I could do only one thing with this podcast, and if that was to give people hope that there's somebody out there in the world that is not going to judge you ever. It doesn't matter where you came from or who you were or are. It doesn't matter to me. I mean, you're human. Everybody's human. We all are human. We all, if we're cut, we all bleed. And it's it's all I ever wanted was people to understand that they're not alone and that you can tell me the deepest, darkest secret that you possibly have, and I promise you, I probably wouldn't be surprised. It's not in me. I listen, I feel, I understand, I get it. And that's what I try to offer people today. That's all I can offer. So I think I'll leave you with that part of my story, the marriage, my first marriage, and we can continue with some other stories in the next episode. But that's what I have for you right now. Is just, yeah, a lot of stuff has happened, but I am so proud of who I am today, and at no point do I regret anything I've ever gone through. Well, that's all for today's episode of The Friend I Wish I Had. Thank you for listening. Please join me again so we can continue to keep each other company. Be sure to subscribe to my podcast and don't forget to visit my website and get an extra dose of friendship. Talk to you soon. Bye.